One of the things I really love about the character Ichigo Kurosaki and his character journey is that in the era of the big three, he was a character who really stood out, which is fitting since we can make a solid argument that out of all the big three titles, Bleach was the one that's taken the most risks when it comes to pushing a more mature, graphic, and a dark tone than, say, Naruto or One Piece. However, that's not why Ichigo stood out for me. It's the fact that as a main character, he was different than what we were given in the form of Naruto Uzumaki and Monkey D. Luffy. One wanted to be the next Hokage who surpassed every Hokage before him, and the other one wanted to be the next king of the pirates. Both were more than willing to shout from the top of their lungs to remind everyone what their goal was, and there were times where we could see that strong belief in their goal gave them the mental amps needed to push through their limits in order to defeat a strong enemy. However, Ichigo wasn't shouting his goal every major arc, and it wasn't something that's easily defined as, say, Naruto or Luffy. Ichigo didn't say he wanted to be the next squad leader of the Gote 13. For Ichigo, his goal was something that was more subtle, to the point where you have a lot of people wrongfully say that he's either boring or they say he has no goal, which I say is a hot take, and I believe both of those to be incorrect. Ichigo's goal was a simple one. He didn't want to be the strongest. He didn't want to be some all-powerful and respectable leader. He simply wanted to be strong enough. It's actually so simple that it's brilliant. Wanting to be strong enough to protect his friends and his loved ones, because it's both open-ended enough to allow him to gain more power, and it's also so clearly defined that there's a clear stopping point when it comes to Ichigo's character progression. The way that Kubo structured that goal throughout the series is brilliant. In order for someone to be strong to protect those who he cherishes, a person must first become aware of who they truly are, face the darkest sides of themselves, conquer that darkness, and find a way to bring all aspects of themselves to peace. A look at Ichigo Kurosaki reveals that he's the embodiment of Sun Tzu's words, where he wrote that if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a great defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. Tite Kubo took this line of thinking and used it to develop Ichigo as a character, and I'm going to explain to you how. Every good writer knows that a protagonist needs a strong internal conflict, but the truly great writers that separate themselves from their peers know that this isn't enough. The internal conflict must be great enough that it not only drives the character forward, but it also becomes so inescapable that it becomes mirrored in the external conflicts that the protagonist faces. Thus is the beauty of Ichigo as a character and his goal to be strong enough to protect his friends. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. It's pretty self-explanatory, and it's the end game for Ichigo's character journey, because by the time he faced Yhwach, Ichigo had truly come to understand who he was as a person, all sides of his soul, and those experiences had hardened him to the point where he could stand up against a being of immeasurable strength. However, for us to get to that point, Tite Kubo had to break down Ichigo from the very beginning to make him see who he is in the final form in the manga. When we first meet Ichigo Kurosaki, we see someone who has a strong sense of will and a strong sense of self, with how he protected the gravesite of a dead child and tried to get her spirit to find peace. However, his encounter with Rukia showed that for as much as Ichigo thought he knew who he was, he knew nothing at all, which is where Tite Kubo implemented Sun Tzu's last line about when you know neither your enemy nor yourself, you succumb to every battle. When the Hollow attacked, it was a battle against an enemy that Ichigo truly knew nothing about, because he didn't even know the very complicated aspects of his soul. He stood no chance against it at first. The only thing that he knew was that he had sisters he needed to protect, and for someone who wanted to be strong enough to protect those who he cared for, he rushed in as his natural defense to do just that. However, Ichigo quickly learned that for as much power as he gained through his lifetime, this was a mountain that he couldn't climb, and now those who he cared for were in danger. It wasn't until Rukia drew her blade and pierced him and he absorbed a majority of Rukia's power that for the first time Ichigo began taking those first real steps towards becoming aware of who he truly is and bringing in all aspects of his soul together. The son of the former Gote 13 squad captain, Ichigo's Soul Reaper potential was always there, but as he trained with Rukia, it quickly became clear that he still had a lot to figure out. He was still progressing at a rate that kept someone like Rukia on her toes for a bit. Just when it felt like Ichigo might have reached a peak, he pushed through it, like when Ichigo blocked the Cero from the Minos Grande and inflicted a lot of damage on it in the process. However, the arrival of Renji and Byakuya would force Ichigo to begin taking a deeper look into the Soul Reaper side of the vessel known as Ichigo Kurosaki, because the subsequent defeat by Byakuya, which proved to Ichigo that he wasn't strong enough to protect someone like Rukia and who he had begun to care for, was what forced him to look deeper inside of himself. For someone who wanted to be strong enough to protect his friends, he needed to go stronger as a Soul Reaper in order to save and protect Rukia. All the battles in the Soul Society, in particular the battle with Kenpachi and Ichigo's own Bankai training, forced Ichigo to dig deeper into himself for the answer to who is Ichigo Kurosaki, the Soul Reaper. But while he did that digging, another side of Ichigo would begin to make itself known, the hollow side. When the Arrancar arrived in Karakura Town, Ichigo would once again be forced to look within himself. The battle with Yami proved that there was more to come for Ichigo, even after his inner hollow interfered and Ichigo and Orihime had to be protected by Urahara. The boy who wanted to be strong enough to protect his own friends was forced to turn inward in order to face his own inadequacies until Grimmjow showed up once again and showed Ichigo that as Ichigo currently was, even with this Bankai, he couldn't win. It goes back to Sun Tzu's words, to not know both yourself and your enemy is to fail in a battle. At this point, Ichigo knew that there was something lurking inside of him, but he was relying purely on the Soul Reaper side of his powers for the battles that he was engaging in. The inner hollow inside of Ichigo was a growing internal conflict that was beginning to pop up more now that the Arrancar were in his presence. Just as the Soul Reapers he fought in the Soul Society were an external conflict, meshing with the internal conflict of Ichigo as a Soul Reaper, the Arrancar were serving as that same role for the hollow side of Ichigo. To defeat his enemy, Ichigo would have to seek out the help of the Visors in order to gain control, and it would be during that time that Ichigo would learn that for as strong as he was, if he wanted to protect those that he cared about, he'd have to grow stronger, which is a common theme when it comes to Ichigo's journey. The beauty of this journey so far is that each time someone he cared for was put in danger, Ichigo had to go into a moment of reflection. In the beginning, he needed to realize that Ichigo, the normal human, wasn't strong enough to protect his sisters. The Soul Society arc showed that he needed to evolve as a Soul Reaper to protect Rukia, and now in the Arrancar saga, he had to face his inner hollow in order to protect Orihime. All the battles against the Espada would push Ichigo gradually into digging deeper into himself until the moment he would fall in battle against Ucleora, whose transformation would utterly destroy Ichigo with no difficulty. The boy who tried to become strong enough to protect those he cared for had seemingly fallen to his death, except hearing the cries and pleas of Orihime to wake up the beast inside of him, and Ichigo, fully taken over by the hollow side inside of him, would go on to brutally destroy his enemy in the process. When Ichigo would go on to try to fight Aizen, the gap in power wouldn't be the only thing standing in the way to become strong enough to protect those who he cared for. Ichigo didn't know himself, and against someone like Aizen, who truly knew what Ichigo was, if he was to engage in a battle against Aizen at that very moment, he would have fallen, just as Sun Tzu stated. It would be that deep dive into the vessel of who Ichigo Kurosaki truly was during the training where Ichigo would become Dangai Ichigo and gain the power needed to stop Aizen. Kubo's background aesthetics for Ichigo's inner world during that time hold up as some of Bleach's best work, especially when we consider how the background itself reflected Ichigo's soul during that point in time, as well as the foreshadowing for what would come later on. The boy who wanted to become strong to protect those who were his friends had done so, but the end result is that he ultimately lost his powers in the process, which brings us to Bleach's most mature and most underappreciated arc, the fullbringer arc. When you come off the emotional highs that built up all towards Aizen's defeat and what that gave you, a moment where many people, including myself at the time, wrongfully believed that the series had peaked, it makes the brilliance of the fullbringer arc hard to appreciate at first glance because you're comparing it to one of the best stretches in shonen manga history. The depression that Ichigo felt here was something that was well needed because it showed us that this character who we seemingly seen at the peak of his power was now rendered to be useless for the first time. The boy who wanted to become stronger to protect everyone he cared for was now too weak to protect them from the threats that Ichigo knew was out there because he not only experienced the supernatural world where Soul Reapers and Hollows battled it out, but he'd also been one of the strongest Soul Reapers out there. For someone who had just fallen off a cliff into the realm of uselessness so quickly, but still maintained the urge to protect those who he cared for, Ichigo was now at his most vulnerable state since the beginning of the series, which is why it's so fitting that the friend he needed to become stronger to protect Chad was one of his closest and oldest friends, was also so fitting given the complexity of Genjo as both a character and an antagonist. What I love about this arc is that while Ichigo is at his lowest point, he has a sister whose powers are beginning to strengthen during a time where Ichigo lost his own. He's got Genjo weaving a spider web all around Ichigo the whole time, and he's watching his friends like Uryu not only fight enemies that Ichigo himself can't combat, but when he goes to visit him in the hospital and tries to inquire about the truth behind the injuries, he's essentially brushed off. For someone who wants to protect his friends, not being of any use only makes the desperation and the depression that much more worse. And to see Ichigo struggling and grappling with that throughout this arc, that was so well written. The revelation about the existence of the fullbringers, people whose parents had been attacked by hollows before they were born, traces a hollow power passed down to the fullbringer. However, it's when Ichigo undergoes his training and eventually completes his fullbring that we see Ichigo for a time gain what he believes is the power that can help him protect his friends, all while not realizing he was wrapped up in Genjo's web and eventually gets stabbed through the chest by Genjo, and Ichigo is reverted back to who he was previously. He's now someone who knows of the supernatural world, was one of the strongest people who fought in that world, and he's now once again human. And even crueler, he got a taste of that power that he needs to protect everyone, only to lose it again. For someone who wants to gain strength to protect those who he cares for, this is one of the cruelest moments in the series, which is why Ichigo's breakdown here is so well earned, because we as the reader have followed him up to this point. It's why when his Soul Reaper powers are fully restored and Ichigo dominates the battle with Genjo in what is my personal favorite fight of the entire series, we see the triumphant return of the hero we know Ichigo to be. And this fight is so earned because it comes on the heels of Ichigo being at his darkest time. However, in order to fight the coming storm that was Yhwach, Ichigo needed to go through those pitfalls in the Fullbring arc because it prepared him to face the side of himself that he got from his mother, the Quincy side of Ichigo's vessel, which is fitting given how huge of a role Ichigo's mother played in his character, despite the fact that she doesn't have a ton of screen time in the series. For this one arc, now that Ichigo has confronted several sides of his vessel, everything is beginning to come full circle, just as the Quincy began their utter destruction of the Soul Society. Powers and abilities far greater than anything Ichigo could have ever imagined, beings with power not only to defeat the mighty Byakuya and leave him in a position where someone as proud as Byakuya had to plead with Ichigo to protect the Soul Society in the single most iconic panel in the entire war arc of Bleach. The Quincy side of Ichigo's lineage is just as much the main character of this arc as Ichigo himself, and the way that Ichigo's blue vein saved him when Yhwach almost tried to kill him was brilliantly done by Kubo. When Hashwolf destroys Ichigo's soul, breaking it in two, it's a symbolic gesture to show that Ichigo is back where we saw him when he confronted the Soul Reaper side of his vessel. Byakuya had embarrassed him, and Ichigo was forced to dig deep inside of himself in order to truly understand the Soul Reaper side of himself, and now he was being forced to do the same thing with the Quincy side. Symbolic because his father was a Soul Reaper and his mother was a Quincy. Two opposing sides have produced Ichigo as a child, and two very similar moments were done to Ichigo at the beginning of the series and at the end of the series. When Ichigo learns the truth about the lineage from his father, it adds another layer of the conflict that serves to build Yhwach as a villain. Kubo made Yhwach into arguably a more imposing villain than Aizen, which is so fitting given that this is the final arc, and Kubo left everything on the table. Everything Ichigo thought he knew was essentially only part of the story. When he gets his Zanpakuto rebuilt, he learns that what he thought was the spirit of the Zanpakuto was actually his Quincy powers that took on the form of Yhwach from over 1,000 years ago. When Ichigo emerges from his inner world, fully armed with the knowledge of what he's been ignorant to, his Zanpakuto is now a dual blade, symbolic for the Shinigami and the Quincy powers inside of his body. The battles that follow with the Quincy afterwards are very important because it's leading a boy who is on the cusp of becoming a man to fight his way to save his friend Uryu, who he believed had been on the wrong side of the war against the Quincy. Now Ichigo had truly gained understanding of who he was. He was now able to carry out what Sun Tzu stated about a man who knows both himself and his enemy won't fall to anyone. And the poetic part about this final battle was that he was side by side with the future wife of his child, and when we see Ichigo transform into the final form that we see him in the series, is a further sign that Ichigo had truly gained to understand who he was as a person. And seeing Ichigo in this form pays off all of the drama that you saw with Ichigo and Uryu previously in this arc. However, the most brilliant thing about this final battle with Yhwach is that Ichigo is someone who wanted to be strong to protect his friends, was now fighting alongside his former enemy Aizen, who ended up being the tide shifter in the battle against Yhwach because Aizen's trickery during the battle, which was set up long before Yhwach would actually clash with them, would result in Ichigo being able to strike down Yhwach. Ichigo didn't have to be the strongest, he just had to be strong enough to protect those who he cared for, strong enough to assist in the final battle, strong enough to deliver the final blow, and he didn't have to shout about his goal the entire way. It was a brilliant crescendo of a character journey that makes Ichigo stand out differently than Naruto's 72 volume journey, 73 if we count Naruto Gaiden, the 7th Hokage in the Scarlet Spring, or Luffy's journey that's now over 100 volumes long and doesn't seem to be slowing down just yet. Ichigo isn't the sexiest of the big three protagonists, but he's got the most interesting story from a character-driven perspective that can only be truly appreciated when you go back and view how each aspect of his character's vessel was reflected in the internal and external conflict of each arc as he gained more understanding of who he was as a person. That being said, I encourage you to check out all these other anime videos you see on the screen right now, and while you consider which video to click on, let me know what your favorite Ichigo moment was in the series.